To me in a crazy world in which we live, and to see whether Mitt Romney can be strong without being bellicose.
If you hear a lot about the auto bailout, jobs, trade, and China, it means Ohio really is the deciding factor in this election.
This is the last time we're going to see these two men together. And so this is not only the debate about foreign policy, this is the last chapter of the book, of the campaign. Which of these guys is going to lift our eyes over the horizon a little bit and says, we can do better than this. We can be a safer, stronger, and more prosperous country and make us feel that optimism? I think that's the guy who wins.
Ben Jones? This is the last time Barack Obama will debate. And I think for a lot of people, that's going to be a very important moment in American history to watch him do this. Is the last time he's going to be a candidate. I'm going to be looking to see how well he holds Romney to his previous statement. Romney's going to want to run away from those statements and do a switcheroo. I'm going to be watching to see can this president hold him without going over the line. And hold him to his previous statements, which have been very bellicose.
And 1 minute left to go. It is remarkable how impactful these debates have been, both in the primary season and also in the presidential.
Well, it changed the race completely after the first debate. And at the second debate, the president sort of stopped the bleeding for himself. But the first debate was a game changer.
President Obama was heading not only for victory, but potentially a blowout. I think he's lost that opportunity for blowout now. He still could get a victory.
But that support must have been soft if it was able to change this.
Yes. Part of it was a lacking of intensity on the Republican side. Republicans have come home. The president brought Democrats back in the second debate. This is the tiebreaker of the debates, if you will. Then we get a two-week chess game, and a very consequential chess game. Where do you land the planes with the candidates? Where do you spend your TV money? Where do you pull back? It's crunch time.
Yep.
The reason all this is because it is a divided nation. And you saw the most recent poll, which is ironically 47% for each candidate.
And let's go to our Wolf Blitz poll.
I'm going to be interested to see if either of these two candidates has any factual errors. We're listening very, very closely. Some of these foreign policy issues are very nuanced, very complex, and one misstatement could cause some international ramifications. We're going to be listening very carefully. Bob Schieffer, as you can see, he's already seated at the table. Within a few seconds, he will introduce both of these candidates. They will come in. He'll read the rules. Good
evening. I'm Howard Nema.
Carefully negotiated between these
and
two
this
campaigns
is Truth Talk News,
and the presidential debate
covering the presidential puppets
everything
debate
has been negotiated. Here's Bob Schieffer.
On foreign policy.
Good evening from the campus of Lynn University here in Boca Raton, Florida. This is the fourth and last debate of the 2012 campaign, brought to you by the Commission on Presidential Debates. This one's on foreign policy. I'm Bob Schieffer of CBS News. The questions are mine, and I have not shared them with the candidates or their aides. The audience has taken a vow of silence, no applause, no reaction of any kind, except right now,
I can't promise that.
President Barack Obama and Governor Mitt Romney. Gentlemen, your campaigns have agreed to certain rules, and they are simple. They've asked me to divide the evening into segments. I'll pose a question at the beginning of each segment. You will each have 2 minutes to respond, and then we will have a general discussion until we move to the next segment. Tonight's debate, as both of you know, comes on the 50th anniversary of the night that President Kennedy told the world that the Soviet Union had installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, perhaps the closest we've ever come to nuclear war. And it is a sobering reminder that every president faces at some point an unexpected threat to our national security from abroad. So let's begin. The first segment is the challenge of a changing Middle East and the new face of terrorism. I'm going to put this into 2 segments, so you'll have 2 topic questions within this one segment on that subject. The first question, and it concerns Libya, The controversy over what happened there continues. 4 Americans are dead, including an American ambassador. Questions remain. What happened? What caused it? Was it spontaneous? Was it an intelligence failure? Was it a policy failure? Was there an attempt to mislead people about what really happened? Governor Romney, you said this was an example of an American policy in the Middle East that is unraveling before our very eyes. I'd like to hear each of you.
That's very true, but it's not going to be the way you hear this now, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for agreeing to moderate this debate this evening. Thank you to Lynn University for welcoming us here, and Mr. President, it's good to be with you again. We were together at a humorous event a little earlier, and it's nice to maybe be funny this time, not on purpose. We'll see what happens. This is obviously an area of great concern to the entire world, and to America in particular, which is to see a complete change in the structure and the environment in the Middle East. With the Arab Spring came a great deal of hope that there would be a change towards more moderation, an opportunity for greater participation on the part of women in public life and in economic life in the Middle East. But instead, we've seen in nation after nation a number of disturbing events. Of course, we see in Syria 30,000 civilians having been killed by the military there. We see in Libya an attack apparently by, well, I think we know now, by terrorists of some kind against our people there. 4 people dead. Our hearts and minds go to them. Mali has been taken over, the northern part of Mali, by al-Qaeda type individuals. We have in Egypt a Muslim Brotherhood president. And so what we're seeing is a pretty dramatic reversal in the kind of hopes we had for that region. And of course, the greatest threat of all is Iran, 4 years closer to a nuclear weapon. And we're going to have to recognize that we have to do as the president's done. I congratulate him on taking out Osama bin Laden and going after the leadership in al-Qaeda. But we can't kill our way out of this mess. We're going to have to put in place a very comprehensive and robust strategy to help the world of Islam and other parts of the world reject this radical, violent extremism, which it's certainly not on the run. It's certainly not hiding. This is a group that is now involved in 10 or 12 countries, and it presents an enormous threat to our friends, to the world, to America long term, and we must have a comprehensive strategy to help reject this kind of extremism.
Mr. President.
Well, my first job as Commander-in-Chief, Bob, is to keep the American people safe. And that's what we've done over the last 4 years.
And enslaved
We
and
ended the war
groped.
in Iraq, refocused our attention on those who actually killed us on 9/11. And as a consequence,
Oh my God.
core leadership has been
Here we go.
decimated. In addition,
With
we're
the-
now
with the-
able to transition out of Afghanistan.
I'm sorry,
in a
I'll shut up.
responsible
I apologize.
way, making sure that Afghans take responsibility for their own security. And that allows us also to rebuild alliances and make friends around the world to combat future threats. Now, with respect to Libya, as I indicated in the last debate, when we received that phone call, I immediately made sure that, number one, we did everything we could to secure those Americans who were still in harm's way. Number two, that we would investigate exactly what happened. And number three, most importantly, that we would go after those who killed Americans and we would bring them to justice. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But I think it's important to step back and think about what happened in Libya. And keep in mind that
Well, what did happen in Libya?
I and Americans took leadership in organizing an international coalition that made sure that
NATO ordered you, Mr. Obama, and you went without congressional approval and created a war and sent love bombs, killing 30,000 Libyan people.
Who had killed Americans.
Yeah, and you freed them. You gave them freedom.
You had tens of thousands of Libyans after the events in Benghazi marching and saying,
What about the 30,000 Libyans that were killed by the NATO actions? Come on, everybody wake up. They're excluding all the truth.
Governor Romney, I'm glad that you agree that we have been successful in going after al-Qaeda. But
Al-Qaeda was a creation of the CIA with Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1979 to fight the Soviets. Osama bin Laden
Well, my strategy is pretty
is Tim
straightforward,
Osman,
to go after the bad
a
guys,
CIA
to make sure we do
asset.
our very best to interrupt them, to kill them, to take them out of the picture.
Wake
but my
up,
strategy
everybody.
is broader than that. That's important, of course. But the key that we're going to have to pursue is a pathway to get the Muslim world to be able to reject extremism on its own. We don't want another Iraq. We don't want another Afghanistan. That's not the right course for us. The right course for us is to make sure that we go after the people who are leaders of these various anti-American groups and these jihadists, but also help the Muslim world. And how do we do that? The group of Arab scholars came together, organized by the UN, to look at how we can help the world reject these terrorists. And the answer that they came up with was this: one, more economic development. We should key our foreign aid, our direct foreign investment, and that of our friends. We should coordinate it to make sure that we push back and give them more economic development. Number two, better education. Number three, gender equality. Number four, the rule of law. We have to help these nations create civil society.
Sounds like Bush.
What's been happening over the last couple of years is, as we've watched this tumult in the Middle East, this rising tide of chaos occur, you see Al-Qaeda rushing in, you see other jihadist groups rushing in, and they're throughout many nations in the Middle East. It's wonderful that Libya seems to be making some progress despite this terrible tragedy. But next door, of course, we have
That's
Egypt,
Rothschild
6 million
progress,
Egypt,
central
80 million
banking and
population.
stealing the resources
We want to make sure that we're seeing progress
Libya.
throughout the Middle East, with Mali now having North Mali taken over by Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda now, by the way, runs the government of Libya. I mean, this is the good Al-Qaeda, I guess.
This is a
I mean, it's just insane. It's like war is peace, ignorance is strength, and freedom is slavery. These puppets will do nothing to change America.
You recognize that Al-Qaeda is a threat.
Al-Qaeda is not a threat, ladies and gentlemen. Al-Qaeda is a fabrication. It is a government talking point for war.
In the 1980s,
For the endless war on terrorism, ladies and gentlemen. Wake up. This is the truth. Truth Talk News.
But, Governor, when it comes to
TruthBroadcastNetwork.com.
policy, you seem to want to import the foreign policies of the 1980s, just like the social policies of the 1950s and the economic policies of the 1950s.
And the Stasi socialist policies of the Obama nation, Obamacare and the Nazi death panels.
We should have more troops in Iraq right now. And the challenge
oh my God, we shouldn't be there at all, ladies and gentlemen. We should close all these military bases. Protect our homelands, protect our borders. And that's how we keep our country safe, not the world safe. We can't keep the world safe from democracy. It's the New World Order.
You said that we should still have troops in Iraq to this day. You indicated that we shouldn't be passing nuclear treaties with Russia, despite the fact that 71 senators, Democrats and Republicans, voted for it. You've said that first we should not have a timeline in Afghanistan. Then you said we should. Now you say maybe, or it depends, which means not only were you wrong, but you were also confusing and sending mixed messages both to our troops and our allies. So what we need to do with respect to the Middle East is strong, steady leadership, not wrong and reckless leadership that...
No leadership, Mr. President. We just have to stay out of foreign entanglements, Mr. President, and stop serving the globalist international bankers' needs and wants and desires to continue to deindustrialize us.
Of course, I don't concur with what the president said about my own record and the things that I've said. They don't happen to be accurate. But I can say this, that we're talking about the Middle East and how to help the Middle East reject the kind of terrorism we're seeing and the rising tide of tumult and confusion. And
well, it would help by, like, stopping the CIA, by obliterating the CIA and the Mossad. That would be a good start, Mr. President. And puppet Robamney.
But I'll respond to a couple of things you mentioned. First of all,
can you see the strings behind them? You feel they can actually, like, they're actually holding them. They're moving their body.
Excuse me. It's a geopolitical foe. And I said in the same paragraph, I said, and Iran is the greatest national security threat we face.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Again, another one. War.
Again, I have clear eyes on this. I'm not going to wear rose-colored glasses when it comes to Russia or Mr. Putin. And I'm certainly not going to say to him, I'll give you more flexibility after the election.
Yeah, you got him on that one. Boom, you hit him hard there. This,
You
but
and I
look,
agreed
I
on
mean,
the
again,
lead
these
that there
people
should
are
be a
not going to
status of
change
forces
anything,
agreement.
ladies and gentlemen. We
Did
got to
you?
wake
Oh, you
up.
didn't want a status of
Change,
forces agreement?
change is going to come from outside of this left-right paradigm, Democrat, Republican bullshit.
In the Middle East.
I'm sorry, you actually, there was an
You
effort
mean
of the
constitutionalist,
status of forces
libertarian,
agreement, and I
bringing
concurred in
back
that and
the
said that we should have
founding
some number
principles of
troops
this
to stay
nation,
on.
and we will
That was something I
flourish
concurred
like we
with.
did
That was your posture. That was my posture
for the
as
first
well.
100
I thought there should have
years,
been 5,000
not being
troops.
deindustrialized as we have been for the last
The answer was
100.
we got no troops through whatsoever.
This is just a few weeks ago that you indicated that we should still have troops in Iraq.
No, I didn't. I'm sorry, that's it. I indicated that you, I indicated that you failed to put in place a status of forces agreement at the end of the conflict that exists.
Governor, here's one thing I've learned as Commander-in-Chief. You've got to be clear, both to our allies and our enemies, about where you stand and what you mean. Now, you just gave a speech a few weeks ago in which you said we should still have troops in Iraq. That is not a recipe for making sure that we are taking advantage of the opportunities and meeting the challenges of the Middle East. Now, it is absolutely true that we cannot just meet these challenges militarily. And so what I've done throughout my presidency and will continue to do is, number one, make sure that these countries are supporting our counterterrorism efforts. Number two,
listen, it's mind-controlling propaganda.
Our interests in Israel's security.
Of course, we're going to have troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. They're not going anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. They have national authorizations. In fact, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2013 prepares for war with Iran. So don't listen to this garbage, these puppets.
Their economic capabilities. But number five, the other thing that we have to do is recognize that we can't continue to do nation building in these regions. Part of American leadership is making sure that we're doing nation building here at home. That will help us maintain the kind of American leadership that we need.
Let me
nation building at home, like you mean like protecting our homeland
and so on, and that is you both
or enslaving the population.
To this, and that is Syria. The war in Syria has now spilled over into Lebanon. We have, more than 100 people that were killed there in a bomb. There were demonstrations there, 8 people dead. Mr. President, it's been more than a year since you told Assad he had to go. Since then, 30,000 Syrians have died. We've had 300,000 refugees. The war goes on. He's still there. Should we reassess our policy and see if we can find a better way to influence events there, or is that even possible?
No, that's why we get all in trouble all the time, because we try to influence events and get involved and put our noses and be busybodies in every other country's affairs so we can move the New World Order and their corporations further into enslaving the rest of the world.
We have provided humanitarian assistance, and we are helping the opposition organize, and we're particularly interested in making sure that we're mobilizing the moderate forces inside of Syria. But ultimately, Syrians are going to have to determine their own future. And so everything we're doing in consultation with our partners in the region, including Israel, which obviously has a huge interest in seeing what happens in Syria, coordinating with Turkey and other countries in the region that have a great interest in this. Now, what we're seeing taking place in Syria is heartbreaking. And that's why we are going to do everything we can to make sure that we are helping the opposition. But we also have to recognize that, for us to get more entangled militarily in Syria is a serious step.
See, he's saying all the right things, ladies and gentlemen. He's being very cautious, but I tell you, like a wolf in sheep's clothing, we will be all over the map with war, no matter who wins this election.
I am confident that Assad's days are numbered. But what we can't do is to simply suggest that, as Governor Romney at times has suggested, that giving heavy weapons, for example, to the Syrian opposition is a simple proposition that would lead us to be safer over the long term.
Governor?
Well, let's step back and talk about what's happening in Syria and how important it is. First of all, 30,000 people being killed by their government is a humanitarian disaster. Secondly, Syria is an opportunity for us because Syria plays an important role in the Middle East, particularly right now. Syria is Iran's only ally in the Arab world. It's their route to the sea. It's the route for them to arm Hezbollah in Lebanon, which threatens, of course, our ally Israel.
See how they're using this tactic? Now, this is Hegelian dialectic in action, because now you're like, oh, Obama's better. No, well, wait a minute. But now you have the situation.
For us. And finally,
now
we
you
don't
have the
military involvement there.
situation.
We don't want to get drawn into a military
That's
conflict.
the truth.
And so the right course
They're
for us
saying they're
is
not
working
wanting to
through
be
our
drawn
partners with
into
our own
military
resources to
conflict, but of
identify
course we will be.
responsible parties within
It's
Syria,
Orwellian.
organize them, bring them together in a form of if not government, a form of council that can take the lead in Syria, and then make sure they have the arms necessary to defend themselves. We do need to make sure that they don't have arms that get into the wrong hands, that those arms could be used to hurt us down the road. We need to make sure as well that we coordinate this effort with our allies, and particularly with Israel. But the Saudis and the Qatari and the Turks are all very concerned about this. They're willing to work with us. We need to have a very effective leadership effort in Syria, making sure that the insurgents in Syria at this stage, and I don't anticipate that in the future. As I indicated, our objectives are to replace Assad and to have in place a new government which is friendly to us, a responsible government if possible. And I want to make sure they get armed and they have the arms necessary to defend themselves, but also to remove Assad. But I do not want to see a military involvement on the part of our troops. And this isn't going to be necessary. We have, with our partners in the region, we have sufficient resources to support those groups. But look, this has been going on for a year. This should have been a time for American leadership. We should have taken a leading role, not militarily, but a leading role organizationally, governmentally, to bring together the parties there, to find responsible parties. As you hear from intelligence sources even today, the insurgents are highly disparate. They haven't come together. They haven't formed a unity group, a council of some kind. That needs to happen. America can help that happen. And we need to make sure they have the arms they need to carry out the very important role, which is getting rid of Assad.
Could we get a quick response, Mr. President? Because I want to ask about Egypt.
I'll be very quick. What you just heard Governor Romney said is he doesn't have different ideas. And that's because we're doing exactly what we should be doing to try to promote a moderate Syrian leadership and an effective transition so that we get Assad out. That's the kind of leadership we've shown. That's the kind of leadership we'll continue to show.
May I ask you, You know, during the Egyptian turmoil, there came a point when you said it was time for President Mubarak to go. Some in your administration thought perhaps we should have waited a while on that. Do you have any regrets about that?
No, I don't, because I think that America has to stand with democracy. The notion that we would have tanks run over those young people who were in Tahrir Square, that is not the kind of American leadership that John F. Kennedy talked about 50 years ago. But what I've also said is that now that you have a democratically elected government in Egypt, that they have to make sure that they take responsibility for protecting religious minorities. And we have put significant pressure on them to make sure they're doing that. To recognize the rights of women, which is critical throughout the region. These countries can't develop if young women are not given the kind of education that they need. They have to abide by their treaty with Israel. That is a red line for us, because not only is Israel's security at stake, but our security is at stake if that unravels. They have to make sure that they're cooperating with us when it comes to counterterrorism, and we will help them with respect to developing their own economy, because ultimately, what's going to make the Egyptian revolution successful for the people of Egypt, but also for the world, is if those young people who gathered there are seeing opportunities. Their aspirations are similar to young people's here. They want jobs. They want to be able to make sure their kids are going to a good school. They want to make sure that they have a roof over their heads and that they have the prospects of a better life in the future. And so one of the things that we've been doing is, for example, organizing entrepreneurship conferences with these Egyptians to give them a sense of how they can start rebuilding their economy in a way that's non-corrupt, that's transparent. But what is also important for us to understand is that for America to be successful in this region, there's some things that we're going to have to do here at home as well. One of the challenges over the last decade is we've done experiments in nation building in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and we've neglected, for example, developing our own economy, our own energy sectors, our own education system, and it's very hard for us to project leadership around the world when we're not doing what we need to do.
Governor Romney, I want to hear your response to that, but I would just ask you, would you have stuck with Mubarak?
No, I believe, as the president indicated and said at the time, that I supported his action there. I felt that I wish we'd have had a better vision of the future. I wish that looking back at the beginning of the president's term and even further back than that we'd have recognized that there was a growing energy and passion for freedom in that part of the world, and that we would have worked more aggressively with our friend and with other friends in the region to have them make the transition towards a more representative form of government, such that it didn't explode in the way it did. But once it exploded, I felt the same as the president did, which is these freedom voices in the streets of Egypt were the people who were speaking of our principles, and the President Mubarak had done things which were unimaginable, and the idea of him crushing his people was not something that we could possibly support. Let me step back and talk about what I think our mission has to be in the Middle East and even more broadly, because our purpose is to make sure the world is peaceful. We want a peaceful planet. We want people to be able to enjoy their lives and know they're going to have a bright and prosperous future and not be at war. That's our purpose. And the mantle of leadership for promoting the principles of peace has fallen to America. We didn't ask for it, but it's an honor that we have it. But for us to be able to promote those principles of peace requires us to be strong. And that begins with a strong economy here at home, and unfortunately, the economy is not stronger. When the president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, says that our debt makes us not a great country, that's a frightening thing. The former chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said that, Admiral Mullen, said that our debt is the biggest national security threat we face. We have weakened our economy. We need a strong economy. We need to have as well a strong military. Our military is second to none in the world. We're blessed with terrific soldiers and extraordinary technology and intelligence. But the idea of $1 trillion in cuts through sequestration and budget cuts to the military would change that. We need to have strong allies. Our association and connection with our allies is essential to America's strength. We're the great nation that has allies, 42 allies and friends around the world. And finally, we have to stand by our principles. And if we're strong in each of those things, American influence will grow. But unfortunately, nowhere in the world is America's influence greater today than it was 4 years ago?
All right.
And that's because we've become weaker on each of those four dimensions.
Perfect. You're going to get a chance to respond to that because that's a perfect segue into our next segment, and that is, what is America's role in the world? And that is the question. What do each of you see as our role in the world? And I believe, Governor Romney, it's your turn to go first.
Well, I absolutely believe that America has a responsibility and the privilege of helping to defend freedom and promote the principles that make the world more peaceful. And those principles include human rights, human dignity, free enterprise, freedom of expression, elections, because when there are elections, people tend to vote for peace. They don't vote for war. So we want to promote those principles around the world. We recognize that there are places of conflict in the world. We want to end those conflicts to the extent humanly possible. But in order to be able to fulfill our role in the world, America must be strong. America must lead. And for that to happen, we have to strengthen our economy here at home. You can't have 23 million people struggling to get a job. You can't have an economy that over the last 3 years keeps slowing down its growth rate. You can't have kids coming out of college, half of whom can't find a job today, or a job that's commensurate with their college degree. We have to get our economy going. And our military. We've got to strengthen our military long term. We don't know what the world is going to throw at us down the road.
This guy is a military industrial complex puppet. He is so in their pocket.
Can't imagine. In the 2000 debates.
And again, they're all on the same. They look like they seem opposed, but they're really not.
So we have to make decisions based upon
the truth is, we are all over the
And that
map.
means a strong military. I will not cut our military budget. We have to also stand by our allies.
That's what we need to do.
I think the tension that exists
See, you
between
can't vote for these people.
Israel
Vote for
and the United
Gary
States
Johnson.
is very unfortunate.
Have some real change. A libertarian that has a chance.
Program
Write in Ron Paul. Don't vote for these
was
criminals.
also unfortunate in terms of, if you will, disrupting the relationship in some ways that existed between us. And then, of course, with regards to standing for our principles, when the students took to the streets in Tehran and the people there protested, the Green Revolution occurred. For the president to be silent, I thought, was an enormous mistake. We have to stand for our principles, stand for our allies, stand for a strong military, and stand for a stronger economy.
Mr. President.
America remains the one indispensable nation. And the world needs a strong America, and it is stronger now than when I came into office. Because we ended the war in Iraq, we were able to refocus our attention on not only the terrorist threat, but also beginning a transition process in Afghanistan. It also allowed us to refocus on alliances and relationships that had been neglected for a decade. And Governor Romney, our alliances have never been stronger. In Asia, in Europe, in Africa, with Israel, where we have unprecedented military and intelligence cooperation, including dealing with the Iranian threat. But what we also have been able to do is position ourselves so we can start rebuilding America. And that's what my plan does. Making sure that we're bringing manufacturing back to our shores so that we're creating jobs here, as we've done with the auto industry, not rewarding companies that are shipping jobs overseas. Making sure that we've got the best education system in the world, including retraining our workers for the jobs of tomorrow. Doing everything we can to control our own energy. We've cut our oil imports to the lowest level in 2 decades because we've developed oil and natural gas, but we also have to develop clean energy technologies that will allow us to cut our exports in half by 2020. That's the kind of leadership that we need to show. And we've got to make sure that we reduce our deficit. Unfortunately, Governor Romney's plan doesn't do it. We've got to do it in a responsible way by cutting out spending we don't need, but also by asking the wealthiest to pay a little bit more. That way we can invest in the research and technology that's always kept us at the cutting edge. Now, Governor Romney has taken a different approach throughout this campaign.
Reckless policies.
Both at home and abroad, he has proposed wrong and reckless policies.
Yeah, reckless policies.
Sure he has. Good economic steward. And
yeah, like what have you done? Reckless, like spending over $1 trillion going in the hole every year for 4 years, over $1 trillion a year.
Are not the way that we are going to maintain
Goldman Sachs backs both of you puppies.
Governor Romney, wrong and reckless
the
policies.
puppet puppies.
I've got a policy for the future, an agenda for the future. And when it comes to our economy here at home,
certainly an agenda.
I know what it takes to create 12 million new jobs and rising take-home pay. And what we've seen over the last 4 years is something I don't want to see over the next 4 years. The president said by now we'd be at 5.4% unemployment. We're 9 million jobs short of that. I will get America working again and see rising take-home pay again, and I'll do it with 5 simple steps. Number 1, we are going to have North American energy independence. We're going to do it by taking full advantage of oil, coal, gas, nuclear, and our renewables. Number 2, we're going to increase our trade. Trade grows about 12% per year. It doubles about every 5 or so years. We can do better than that, particularly in Latin America. The opportunities for us in Latin America, we have just not taken advantage of fully. As a matter of fact, Latin America's economy is almost as big as the economy of China. We're all focused on China. Latin America is a huge opportunity for us. Time zone, language opportunities. Number 3, we're going to have training programs that work for our workers and schools that finally put the parents and the teachers and the kids first, and the teachers' union is going to have to go behind. And then we're going to have to get to a balanced budget. We can't expect entrepreneurs and businesses large and small to take their life savings or their company's money and invest in America if they think we're headed to the road to Greece. And that's where we're going right now unless we finally get off this spending and borrowing binge. And I'll get us on track to a balanced budget. And finally, number 5, we've got to champion small business. Small business is where jobs come from. 2/3 of our jobs come from small businesses. New business formation is down at the lowest level in 30 years under this administration. I want to bring it back and get back good jobs and rising take-home pay.
Well, let's talk about what we need to compete. First of all, Governor Romney talks about small businesses, but Governor, when you were in Massachusetts, small businesses development ranked about 48th, I think, out of 50 states in Massachusetts, because the policies that you're promoting actually don't help small businesses. And the way you define small businesses include folks at the very top. And they include you and me. That's not the kind of small business promotion we need. But let's take an example that we know is going to make a difference in the 21st century, and that's our education policy. We didn't have a lot of chance to talk about this in the last debate. Now, under my leadership, what we've done is reformed education, working with governors, 46 states. We've seen progress and gains in schools that were having a terrible time, and they're starting to finally make progress. And what I now want to do is to hire more teachers, especially in math and science, because we know that we've fallen behind when it comes to math and science. And those teachers can make a difference. Now, Governor Romney, when you were asked by teachers whether or not this would help the economy grow, you said this isn't going to help the economy grow. When you were asked about reduced class sizes, you said class sizes don't make a difference. But I tell you, if you talk to teachers, they will tell you it does make a difference. And if we've got math teachers who are able to provide the kind of support that they need for our kids, that's what's going to determine whether or not the new businesses are created here. Companies are going to locate here depending on whether we've got the most highly skilled workforce. And the kinds of budget proposals that you've put forward, when we don't ask either you or me to pay a dime more in terms of reducing the deficit, but instead we slash support for education, that's undermining our long-term competitiveness. That is not good for America's position in the world. And the world notices.
Let me get back to foreign policy. Can I just get back?
Well, I need to speak a moment, if you can let me, Bob, just about education, because I'm so proud of the state that I had the chance to be governor of. We have every 2 years tests that look at how well our kids are doing. 4th graders and 8th graders are tested in English and math. While I was governor, I was proud that our 4th graders came out #1 of all 50 states in English, and then also in math. And our 8th graders, #1 in English, and also in math. First time one state had been #1 in all 4 measures. How do we do that? Well, Republicans and Democrats came together on a bipartisan basis to put in place education principles that focused on having great teachers in the classroom.
10 years
earlier.
And
that was what allowed us to become the #1 state in the nation.
But that was 10 years before you took office.
Absolutely.
And then you cut education spending when you came into office.
And we kept our schools #1 in the nation. They're still #1 today.
All right.
And the principles that we put in place, we also gave kids not just a graduation exam that determined whether they were up to the skills needed to be able to compete, but also if they graduated the top quarter of their class, They got a 4-year tuition-free ride at any Massachusetts public institution of higher learning.
That happened before you came into office.
That was actually mine, actually. Mr. President, you got that fact wrong.
I want to try to shift it because we have heard some of this in the other debates. Governor, you say you want a bigger military. You want a bigger Navy. You don't want to cut defense spending. What I want to ask you, we're talking about financial problems in this country. Where are you going to get the money?
Well, let's come back and talk about the military, but all the way through. First of all, I'm going through from the very beginning. We're going to cut about 5% of the discretionary budget, excluding military. That's number one.
But can you do this without driving
the good news is I'll be happy to have you take a look. Come on our website. You'll look at how we get to a balanced budget within 8 to 10 years. We do it by reducing spending in a whole series of programs. By the way, number one I get rid of is Obamacare. There are a number of things that sound good, but frankly, we just can't afford them. And that one doesn't sound good, and it's not affordable. So I get rid of that one from day one. To the extent humanly possible, we get that out. We take program after program that we don't absolutely have to have, and we get rid of them. Number two, we take some programs that we are going to keep, like Medicaid, which is a program for the poor. We take that health care program for the poor, and we give it to the states to run because states run these programs more efficiently. As a governor, I thought, please, give me this program. I can run this more efficiently than the federal government, and states, by the way, are proving it. States like Arizona, Rhode Island have taken these Medicaid dollars, have shown they can run these programs more cost effectively. So I want to do those two things. It gets us to a balanced budget with 8 to 10 years. But the military, let's come back to the military, though.
Well, that's what I'm trying to find out.
Let's talk about the military.
You should have answered the first question. Look, Governor Romney's called for $5 trillion of tax cuts that he says he's going to pay for by closing deductions. Now, the math doesn't work, but he continues to claim that he's going to do it. He then wants to spend another $2 trillion on military spending that our military's not asking for. Now, keep in mind that our military spending has gone up every single year that I've been in office. We spend more on our military than the next 10 countries combined. China, Russia, France, the United Kingdom, you name it. Next 10. And what I did was work with our Joint Chiefs of Staff to think about what are we going to need in the future to make sure that we are safe. And that's the budget that we've put forward. But what you can't do is spend $2 trillion in additional military spending that the military is not asking for.
You see how they're working this out? Like he's making out, you can't do all these things, and he's making all these valid points, but they're really just controlling this whole, I mean, the fact is the military spending will continue to be high. It will continue to be outrageously high. The one thing that we don't need
But when it comes to our military, what we have to think about is not...
See what happens if you vote for either one of these puppets.
We've got to think about capabilities.
Of the New World Order.
We need to be thinking about cybersecurity. We need to be thinking about space.
Thinking about
That's exactly
space. Yeah, you closed NASA, Obama, by an executive order. You just closed NASA, and you're talking about space. You see the Orwellian nonsense here, ladies and gentlemen?
To keep the American people safe. That's exactly
he knows what he's doing. Sure he is. He's keeping the FEMA camps all ready for all the civil unrest, buying rounds of ammunition for Homeland Security.
Because we've got to make sure that our economy is strong at home so that we can project military power.
Listen to this nonsense.
Bob, I'm pleased that I've balanced budgets. I was in the world of business for 25 years. If you didn't balance your budget, you went out of business. I went to the Olympics that was out of balance, and we got it on balance and made a success there. I had the chance to be governor of state. 4 years in a row, Democrats and Republicans came together to balance the budget. We cut taxes 19 times, balanced our budget. The president hasn't balanced a budget yet. I expect to have the opportunity to do so myself.
All right.
I'm going to be able to balance the budget. Let's talk about military spending. And that's this.
About 30 seconds.
Our Navy is our Navy is smaller now than any time since 1917. The Navy said they needed 313 ships to carry out their mission. We're not under 285. We're headed down to the low 200s if we go through with sequestration. That's unacceptable to me. I want to make sure that we have the ships that are required by our Navy. Our Air Force is older and smaller than any time since it was founded in 1947. We've changed for the first time since FDR. Since FDR, we've always had the strategy of saying we could fight in 2 conflicts at once. Now we're changing to 1 conflict. Look, this, in my view, is the highest responsibility of the President of the United States, which is to maintain the safety of the American people. And I will not cut our military budget by $1 trillion, which is the combination of the budget cuts that the President has, as well as the sequestration cuts. That, in my view, is making our future less certain and less secure.
Bob, I just need to comment on this. First of all, the sequester is not something that I proposed. It's something that Congress has proposed. It will not happen. The budget that we're talking about is not reducing our military spending, it's maintaining it. But I think Governor Romney maybe hasn't spent enough time looking at how our military works. You mentioned the Navy, for example, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets because the nature of our military has changed. We have these things called aircraft carriers where planes land on them. We have these ships that go underwater, nuclear submarines. And so the question is not a game of battleship where we're counting ships. It's what are our capabilities? And so when I sit down with the Secretary of the Navy and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we determine how are we going to be best able to meet all of our defense needs in a way that also keeps faith with our troops, that also makes sure that our veterans have the kind of support that they need when they come home. And that is not reflected in the kind of budget that you're putting forward because it just doesn't work.
All right.
And, you know, we visited the website quite a bit, and it still doesn't work.
A lot to cover. I'd like to move to the next segment. Red lines, Israel and Iran. Would either of you, and you'll have 2 minutes, and President Obama, you have the first go at this one. Would either of you be willing to declare that an attack on Israel is an attack on the United States? Which, of course, is the same promise that we give to our close allies like
God have mercy. It's not the same thing, but of course they want to brainwash you into this. We don't need any of this, ladies and gentlemen. None of it. We don't have to fight for anybody's battle. That's the mind control. That's the United Nations bringing everyone together to help each other fight and kill
is a true friend
for the criminal globalists.
And if Israel is attacked, America will stand with Israel. I've made that clear throughout my presidency.
So they want that for the Jewish vote. Like the Jewish vote doesn't understand, or many do. I have many Jewish friends that are awake and realize that the state of Israel and being a Jew are two totally different things. The Zionists,
between our two countries in history.
Many
we'll
other
be carrying out
denominations.
the largest military exercise with Israel in history this very week. But to the issue of Iran, as long as I'm president of the United States, Iran will not get a nuclear weapon. I made that clear when I came into office. We then organized the strongest coalition and the strongest sanctions against Iran in history, and it is crippling their economy. Their currency has dropped 80%. Their oil production has plunged to the lowest level since they were fighting a war with Iraq 20 years ago. So their economy is in a shambles. And the reason we did this is because
remember when we did this to Iraq, that it killed 550,000 impoverished Iraqi children and 1 million more. These sanctions hurt the worst, the people that he wants to help. Like Obama wants to have infanticide against a child that survives an abortion. The child should be allowed to die. I mean, this is just how much mind control you're under, ladies and gentlemen.
Israel wiped off the map.
Gary Johnson, 2012,
the work that we've done
live free.
with respect to sanctions now offers Iran a choice. They can take the diplomatic route and end their nuclear program, or they will have to face a united world and a United States president, me, who said we're not going to take any options off the table. The disagreement I have with Governor Romney is that during the course of this campaign, he's often talked as if we should take premature military action. I think that would be a mistake, because when I've sent young men and women into harm's way, I always understand that that is the last resort, not the first resort.
2 minutes.
Well, first of all, I want to underscore the same point the president made, which is that if I'm president of the United States, when I'm president of the United States, we will stand with Israel. And if Israel is attacked, we have their back, not just diplomatically, not just culturally, but militarily. That's number one. Number two, with regards to Iran and the threat of Iran, there's no question but that a nuclear Iran, a nuclear-capable Iran, is unacceptable to America. It presents a threat not only to our friends, but ultimately a threat to us, to have Iran have nuclear material, nuclear weapons that could be used against us or to be threatening to us. It's also essential for us to understand what our mission is in Iran, and that is to dissuade Iran from having a nuclear weapon through peaceful and diplomatic means. And crippling sanctions are something I called for 5 years ago when I was in Israel speaking at the Herzliya conference. I laid out 7 steps. Crippling sanctions were number 1, and they do work. You're seeing it right now in the economy. It's absolutely the right thing to do to have crippling sanctions. I'd have put them in place earlier, but it's good that we have them. Number 2, something I would add today is I would tighten those sanctions. I would say that ships that carry Iranian oil can't come into our ports. I imagine the EU would agree with us as well. Not only ships couldn't, I'd say companies that are moving their oil can't, people who are trading in their oil can't. I would tighten those sanctions further. Secondly, I'd take on diplomatic isolation efforts. I'd make sure that Ahmadinejad is indicted under the Genocide Convention. His words amount to genocide incitation. I would indict him for it. I would also make sure that their diplomats are treated like the pariah they are around the world, the same way we treated the apartheid diplomats of South Africa. We need to increase pressure time and time again on Iran, because anything other than a solution to this which stops this nuclear folly of theirs is unacceptable to America. And
what makes anyone think that Iran wants nuclear war and they want to blow up Israel? Because they want you to believe that. They are liars, ladies and gentlemen. These are the worst kind of liars, the ones that do not have conscience, that believe in only one way, and that way is preparing for the worst, preparing for the henny penny sky is falling. Be prepared, prep up, have 9 years of supplies in case there's the end of the world. Especially with Robamney being a Mormon, that's part of their faith. They must actually prepare for the end times. So if anyone was going to be more willing to bring us there, it would be Mitt Romney, to be honest. But again, I lost the stream here from CNN. I'll bring it back and try not to have too much commentary until the end of the show, and then we'll have Harry Link with Death to the New World Order, and then Liberty Ann at 11 p.m. So happy to have Libertarian Ann going at it here on truthbroadcastnetwork.com. All right, let's hear what the puppets have to say.
You'd say them louder, and somehow that would make a difference. And it turns out that the work involved in setting up these crippling sanctions is painstaking. It's meticulous. We started from the day we got into office. And this is a testament to how we've restored American credibility and strength around the world, is we had to make sure that all the countries participated, even countries like Russia and China. Because if it's just us that are imposing sanctions, we've had sanctions in place for a long time. It's because we got everybody to agree that Iran is seeing so much pressure. And we've got to maintain that pressure.
We've gotten the global community to come together to kill the poorest of the poor in Iran.
They convince the
like they did in Iraq.
Not pursuing a nuclear program.
Through the humanitarian efforts of the United Nations and Alyssa Milano saying that we must help save the children of UNICEF
in the meantime,
as they depopulate Africa.
Clear evidence that takes place. And one last thing, just to make this point. The clock is ticking. We're not going to allow
How's that for
Iran
foreign
to
policy? The clock is ticking.
Engage in negotiations that lead nowhere. And I've been very clear to them. Because of the intelligence coordination that we do with a range of countries, including Israel, we have a sense of when they would get breakout capacity, which means that we would not be able to intervene in time to stop their nuclear program. And that clock is ticking. And we're going to make sure that if they do not meet the demands of the international community, then we are going to take all options necessary to make sure they don't have a nuclear weapon.
Governor. I think from the very beginning, one of the challenges we've had with Iran is that they have looked at this administration and felt that the administration was not as strong as it needed to be. I think they saw weakness where they had expected to find American strength. And I say that because from the very beginning, the president in his campaign some 4 years ago said he'd meet with all the world's worst actors. In his first year, He'd sit down with Chavez and Kim Jong-il, with Castro, and with President Ahmadinejad of Iran. And I think they looked and thought, well, that's an unusual honor to receive from the President of the United States. And then the President began what I've called an apology tour of going to various nations in the Middle East and criticizing America. I think they looked at that and saw weakness. Then when there were dissidents in the streets of Tehran, a green revolution, holding signs saying, "Is America with us?" the President was silent. I think they noticed that as well. And I think that when the President said he was going to create daylight between ourselves and Israel, that they noticed that as well. All of these things suggested, I think, to the Iranian mullahs that, hey, we can keep on pushing along here. We can keep talks going on, but we're just going to keep on spinning centrifuges. Now there are some 10,000 centrifuges spinning uranium, preparing to create a nuclear threat to the United States and to the world. That's unacceptable for us, and it's essential for a president to show strength from the very beginning, to make it very clear what is acceptable and not acceptable. And an Iranian nuclear program is not acceptable to us. They must not develop nuclear capability. And the way to make sure they understand that is by having from the very beginning the tightest sanctions possible. They need to be tightened. Our diplomatic isolation needs to be tougher. We need to indict Ahmadinejad. We need to put the pressure on them as hard as we possibly can. Because if we do that, we won't have to take the military action.
Bob, let me just respond. Nothing Governor Romney just said is true. Starting with this notion of me apologizing. This has been probably the biggest whopper that's been told during the course of this campaign. And every fact checker and every reporter who's looked at it, Governor has said this is not true. And when it comes to tightening sanctions, look, as I said before, we've put in the toughest, most crippling sanctions ever. And the fact is, while we were coordinating an international coalition to make sure these sanctions were effective, you were still invested in a Chinese state oil company that was doing business with the Iranian oil sector. So I'll let the American people decide, judge, who's going to be more effective and more credible when it comes to imposing crippling sanctions. And with respect to our attitude about the Iranian Revolution, I was very clear about the murderous activities that had taken place, and that was contrary to international law and everything that civilized people stand for. And so the strength that we have shown in Iran is shown by the fact that we've been able to mobilize the world. When I came into office, the world was divided. Iran was resurgent. Iran is at its weakest point, economically, strategically, militarily, than in many years. And we are going to continue to keep the pressure on to make sure that
they sure are going to keep the pressure on, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Howard Nema. Thank you for watching Truth Talk News. Be here again tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on TruthBroadcastNetwork.com. Let's listen to the puppets as we, the people, will rise to change.
Is because you went to the Middle East and you flew to Egypt and to Saudi Arabia and to Turkey and Iraq. And by the way, you skipped Israel, our closest friend in the region. But you went to the other nations. By the way, they noticed that you skipped Israel. And then in those nations, and on Arabic TV, you said that America had been dismissive and derisive. You said that on occasion, America had dictated to other nations. Mr. President, America has not dictated to other nations. We have freed other nations from dictators.
Bob, let me respond. If we're going to talk about trips that we've taken, when I was a candidate for office, first trip I took was to visit our troops. And when I went to Israel as a candidate, I didn't take donors. I didn't attend fundraisers. I went to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum there, to remind myself the nature of evil and why our bond with Israel will be unbreakable. And then I went down to the border towns of Sderot, which had experienced missiles raining down from Hamas. And I saw families there who showed me where missiles had come down near their children's bedrooms. And I was reminded of what that would mean if those were my kids. Which is why, as president, we funded an Iron Dome program to stop those missiles. So that's how I've used my travels. When I travel to Israel and when I travel to the region. And the central question at this point is going to be who's going to be credible to all parties involved. And they can look at my track record, whether it's Iran sanctions, whether it's dealing with counterterrorism, whether it's supporting democracy, whether it's supporting women's rights, whether it's supporting religious minorities, and they can say that the President of the United States and the United States of America stood on the right side of history. And that kind of credibility is precisely why we've been able to show leadership on a wide range of issues facing the world right now.
What if the Prime Minister of Israel called you on the phone and said, our bombers are on the way, we're going to bomb Iran? What do you think?
Little fear-mongering things and all this like ridiculous questioning. What a proper puppets presentation, ladies and gentlemen, by CNN. And clearly their corporate interests, keep both of them on the same side of the line. But we the people, we will rise above these puppets and their misery.
Which is what's happening in the world. And the President's statement that things are going
That's
so
a promise.
well. Look, I look at what's happening around the world, and I see Iran 4 years closer to a bomb. I see the Middle East with a rising tide of violence, chaos, tumult. I see jihadists continuing to spread. Whether they're rising or just about the same level, hard to precisely measure, but this is clear they're there. They're very, very strong. I see Syria with 30,000 civilians dead. Assad still in power. I see our trade deficit with China larger than it's growing larger every year, as a matter of fact. I look around the world, and I don't feel that you see North Korea continuing to export their nuclear technology. Russia said they're not going to follow Nunn-Lugar anymore. They're back away from nuclear proliferation treaties that we had with them. I look around the world. I don't see our influence growing around the world. I see our influence receding, in part because of the failure of the president to deal with our economic challenges at home, in part because of our withdrawal from our commitment.
Well, maybe that's not such a bad thing if we could just get out of there, but we cause hatred, ladies and gentlemen. Good night. Here's Harry Link with
the president received a letter from 38 Democrat senators